Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning as we discuss mid-band spectrum for 5G and beyond. And this conversation is a timely conversation for a couple of reasons. Firstly, as we work towards building a sustainable digital economy in the Caribbean, spectrum is so essential for us to do that. Secondly, as we prepare for WRC 2023, we need to have some collaboration as a Caribbean on how we going to the meeting and how we are going to collaborate to ensure that the Caribbean is not left out of the conversation. And thirdly, we need to have a more holistic view of how we view spectrum. And that's why I'm really, really happy this morning that we have policymakers, we have regulators, and we also have service providers on this forum to discuss this issue. And we have a good lineup of speakers. We have Huawei, who will give us the Huawei's perspective. We also have Ericsson and Nokia. So I want to thank all the speakers for joining us and sharing their experience, sharing their knowledge with us this morning. I also want to thank all the attendees. I know spectrum has been in recent weeks, have been the topics, but I think we cannot have too much of the topic. So on behalf of the Canto board, the Canto secretariat, and the entire team, I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. And I take really a great pleasure in handing you over to our moderator, Canto Director, and the champion for spectrum in Canto, for the Canto community. So thank you all again, and Director Sutherland, over to you.
Thank you, Madam SG. Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly our pleasure to have you with us this morning to discuss mid-band spectrum requirements of 5G and beyond. As Madam SG just advised us, we do have an August panel to take us through this discussion. Our session is an hour and a half, and we will have questions in the last 20 minutes. You will be able to put your questions in the chat or to raise your hand using the hand function, and you will be acknowledged, and then you can open your mic and speak if you prefer that approach. As had already been advised, we will be having presentations from GSMA by Veena Rawat, who is a senior spectrum advisor at GSMA, and Lucas Galito, who is the head of GSMA for LATAM. Also presenting will be Jose Ayala from Ericsson. He is the policy director at Ericsson. Presenting as well will be Nokia, who will have representing Jose Arias, who is the LATAM North Policy Director, as well as the Head of Government Affairs for Latin America, Celedonio von Wutenu. And finally, we will have a presentation from Cesar Funes Garay, who is in charge of public affairs, the public affairs VP rather, for LATAM Huawei. After all the presentations, we will have the Q&A, and finally, we will have our closing session, our closing remarks rather. So please be sure to have your questions ready for the presenters. In the context too, as Madam SG had mentioned, that this is the last segment as we run up to the WRC 23 session in Dubai in November. We will have a final preparatory meeting for our part of the world, Region 2, at the end of August in Ottawa, Canada. So these presentations will help us to finalize our positions as a region. I know that would have already done quite a bit of work, but this certainly will be useful in assessing our positions. So without further ado, I will hand over to GSMA, to Lucas Galito, and to Veena Rawat. I will come back to you to announce the next presentation. Thank you. Please go ahead, Lucas.
Thank you very much, Melessia. It's a pleasure to be with you all guys today. Thank you very much, Teresa and Canto for the invitation. It's always great to spend some time with our friends in the Caribbean. So I would like to start by sharing my screen with some slides that I think will help with the discussion. Hopefully, after the pandemic, you should be able to see my screen because I should be able to share my screen correctly. Melessia, can you see it? Please, can you please confirm? Yeah, right?
Yes.
Yeah, super. So I think it's fair to say that we should start this mid-band spectrum for 5G requirements and beyond presentation by presenting exactly what are the mid-band spectrum needs. So some of you may be familiar with the report that was published, if I'm not wrong, last year or last year about mid-band spectrum needs. And these reports, the ones that would like to double click and dig down on the rationales for this report, that you have the link there. I should have put the QR code to make things easier. But if you Google in your if you Google on internet GSMA mid-band reports, you will be able to find it. And the report, what it shows is that's going to be needed around 2 gigahertz of spectrum in mid-bands to make 5G and beyond Gs a reality by 2030. So you have some cities there that we use as a reference. There are more in the report, but on average, in the region, it's going to be needed 2 gigahertz of spectrum for mid-bands. And we think that agenda items 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 will help raise harmonized mid-band capacity. And in a few minutes, Vina will double click on that. And it's also fair to ask ourselves where that spectrum will come from. So this is like a general screenshot of where do we have allocated this mid-band spectrum in our region. So we have our traditional bands, 1.8, 1.9, 2.1 AWS. We have the lower 3.5 gigahertz and the upper 3.5 gigahertz that Vina is gonna talk about it in a few minutes, and all the CTEL and WRC work around it, the 4.8 gigahertz band, and of course, and we have specific sessions during this morning on 6 gigahertz band. You know, this famous band has been under discussion in the region and around the world for a while as well. And it's interesting to say that, you know, we always focus as well in the efficiency of the use of that spectrum, you know, and in this case, I have to say that size matters, because when it comes to the impact on the channel size, we see that failing to allocate enough bandwidth in the mid-band spectrums, like for example in 3.5 gigahertz, that would increase the number of cell sites that's needed to drive the same capacity. And that means that the 5G, in this case, the 5G rollout would be more costly, meaning that there would be a barrier in the deployment preventing people to live under, in this case, 5G coverage. But also, our report shows that that if we failed also to have enough bandwidth in the mid bands, that would lead to have more costly deployment as well, and also as I mentioned, and also the benefits for Latin America and the Caribbean will be trimmed. So we also have a report that shows that additional 300 megahertz means $3.5 billion in the GDP for the next years, available in the regional economy, and up to $5 billion if additional 700 megahertz are being considered. So in this case, we also focus not only from the technical perspective, but also from the cost efficiency perspective. And having said that, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Veena Rawat, to take the lead on the following slides, where we will focus on the device ecosystem and the CTEL WRC process. Veena, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Lucas. And I have to say, it's always a great pleasure for me to be talking to my friends in the Caribbean, because I always enjoy it. Somehow I just feel I have a special relationship with the Caribbean, and I hope that this is the same. It's mutual. So basically, what we're showing in this slide is that in the 3.5 gigahertz band, which we refer to as 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz, which is 500 megahertz, the device ecosystem is already there. Most of us have devices where this band is there. 3GPP already has the standard, and the devices are, it says 650 plus, but we have 800, 900 folks devices have been already announced. So it's in your devices. Now the question comes down to is, when you use these devices in a given country, how much of the spectrum is authorized in a given country? So my next slide is about, or maybe let me backtrack. So what I would be focusing on, Lucas also referred to two agenda items, 1.1 and 1.2 and 1.3, but 1.3 is for region 1 and 1.1 is for 4.8 gigahertz, which is also was on his chart. I will focus on 1.2, the agenda item 1.2 for WRC 23, and it's going to be one of the very high priority items because it's looking at spectrum for mobile, for IMT, and I'm sure in all the presentations or all the talk we are doing these days is the key component of the digital transformation is the connectivity, and this whole agenda item is going to be helping addressing that connectivity agenda from a mobile and fixed communication perspective. So on agenda item 1.2, we showed you the band 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz. Part of that band is on the agenda, and then the other agenda item is for 6 gigahertz. Lucas mentioned the 6 gigahertz, and I will talk more about the 6 gigahertz in a minute. But basically, this chart is showing you that GSMA did, as the previous study for the overall the mid-band spectrum, we did a specific study for cost benefit analysis for 6 gigahertz band, and goes without saying that if you license the whole 6 gigahertz band, which is 1200 megahertz of bandwidth, if you license that whole 1200 megahertz, then you get the maximum benefit. And if you do the hybrid, half of it is for unlicensed or license exempt, we call it sometimes, and half of it is for license. So the black portion is the upper portion, which I refer to as upper 6 gigahertz with 700 megahertz of bandwidth. You still get the benefits. You get a lot more benefits still than if any administration decides to go to scenario 2, which is having the 1200 megahertz all for license exempt. Mind you, you know that some of the countries in our region and elsewhere have made the decision to go for license exempt in the entire band. But what I will be talking about is the necessity of having at least the upper 700 megahertz band for IMT or for mobile broadband connectivities going forward. So next slide, Lucas. Okay, so that's just the introduction. We talked about the 3.3 and 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz. Sometimes we refer to as C-band satellite, in the satellite world, we always call it C-band. And then the other band is 6 gigahertz, and that's where my focus is. So to tell you this 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz, the C-band has been on the WRC agenda since WRC 2007. And since then, we have been talking about it, but we have only harmonized 200 megahertz of the bandwidth in this C-band, which is the middle, which is 3.4 to 3.6 gigahertz. We did that at WRC 15. But what is needed, this is the launch band for 5G. So what is needed is a lot more than 200 megahertz. You would say, why? Well, the standards have been developed, and as Lucas showed in the slide, size matters. The minimum channel size in the mid-band required for the operators to deliver the 5G services is 100 megahertz. If you have more than 2 operators, you do not have harmonized spectrum for mobile broadband or IMT. So we definitely need more than 200 megahertz. And what the WRC is going to address is the lower portion, lower 100 megahertz, 3.3 to 3.4 gigahertz. That's the lower 100 megahertz. And then the upper 100 megahertz, upper 200 megahertz, which is 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz. We know very well that there is no spectrum, okay, unless we go, beyond 100 gigahertz or something. There is no spectrum which mobile broadband can use, and it's unencumbered. So this spectrum also has incumbents. It has FSS, but a lot of work has gone on since 2007. We have been talking about this band to see how the IMT and FSS, the fixed satellite services, can coexist. And I will be the first one to say, recognize the importance of the fixed satellite services, particularly in the Caribbean. So there have been coexistence studies. There are guidelines provided for coexistence. So the coexistence with FSS is not the issue. The issue is to make sure that at this WRC 23, this is probably one of our last opportunities to address spectrum in this range, since we have been talking about, since 2007, to get identified for IMT. And why do we want to get identified for IMT? Because we need harmonized spectrum for all the good reasons for the harmonization. So those two pieces, 100 megahertz at the lower end and the 200 megahertz at the upper end, 3.6 to 3.8, are on the table for the WRC. And many of you are already, many countries have already authorized a good chunk of this spectrum, and I'm sure that many of you are also already looking at authorizing this band. But we only have 200 megahertz harmonized for our region. Next slide, please. Lucas, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so Lucas showed a slide about the amount of spectrum needed mid-band for 5G. Well, we need 2 gigahertz, and it has to come from somewhere. And what this slide is showing is that if I take into account all the existing spectrum, the blue portion in this chart, which includes the 3.5 to 3.8, the C-band, current spectrum is around 1150, okay, 1150 megahertz. There is a shortfall of 850 megahertz, and it has to come from somewhere. And that's where the 6 gigahertz sits, is in order to meet this shortfall, to deliver the 5G services and their expansion, we need to have additional bandwidth beyond the C-band, beyond the 3.3 to 3.8 gig, and we need that additional bandwidth in the 600 megahertz. Unless we have the sufficient spectrum, you recall the other slide, the cost of delivering the services, the big cost of getting the infrastructure, the number of base stations one would use will go up. And obviously we are doing these services for our citizens, and we would not want to do that. So this shows you that the 6 gigahertz spectrum is required rather to meet the shortfall. If we don't meet that if we don't go in the 6 gigahertz band, the other options are you will put more stress on the C-band, so you will go above 3.8 gigahertz, because the C-band, the satellite the core satellite band is 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz. You start moving beyond 3.8 gigahertz, you are looking at using more and more spectrum from FSS. And depending on what your needs for FSS are, you can certainly do that. And Canada and US have already done that they have gone up to 4 gigahertz in there, and some other countries, Korea, etc., have gone. But it depends on your need for FSS in this. The other option is to go under 4.8 gigahertz. That is under agenda item 1.1, and it is a NATO band. Some countries have it for IMT, but again, none of the Caribbean countries have so far, at least in the current regulations, have any spectrum in 4.8 gigahertz. And I'm not aware of any activity for looking at in the 4.8 gigahertz. All this to say that if we want to reduce the stress on the upper part of the spectrum for FSS, and we want to make sure that we have sufficient spectrum to meet the needs for 5G, including its expansion, we need the 6 gigahertz up to 700 megahertz in the 6 gigahertz. And I refer to it as upper 6 gig. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, no band is unencumbered. 6 gigahertz, of course, we have existing services there. This is an uplink band for fixed satellite services. The C band was downlink band, so the earth stations were receiving. This is an uplink band. The earth stations are transmitting to the satellite. We also have fixed service incumbents here, and many of you may be using it for different applications for fixed service, whether you are using it for the control of some critical infrastructure such as utilities or water, or your MNOs, your operators may be using it for backhaul. When we do the WRC agenda items and the 6 gigahertz rather, being on the agenda as on agenda item 1.2, ITU does extensive studies in the intervening period between from one WRC to the next WRC. So in order to prepare for WRC 23, extensive studies were done to see how the 6 gigahertz band could be used for IMT and how one would coexist or address the protection to the incumbents. And I can provide the reference to those studies. Because of the lack of time, I would not go in those studies, but the studies do show that coexistence of IMT in this band can happen with the satellite services and with the fixed services. I have to say here, just as an aside, I mentioned that some countries have opened this band for unlicensed services, and United States is one of them. That and Canada and other countries I can name, some other countries. They did these studies, a lot of studies to see how the unlicensed spectrum will impact the licensed services. But that issue is not fully resolved. If you check the press, I check the press most of the time, there are still issues going on in terms of how the unlicensed use, whether it's indoor, very low power or outdoor, how that would impact the, especially the some of the 6 gigahertz uses, such as the utilities controlling, using fixed service or fixed systems for the control of their infrastructure. Their concern is these are critical applications, and they want to make sure that an unlicensed service, such as Wi-Fi, which is what is going on in this band, through some administration decisions, that unlicensed service does not cause interference. So some testing and some debate is still going on that. And the point I want to make is that any nation making a decision on unlicensed for any spectrum has to take it very, very seriously for 2 major reasons. One, once you license the spectrum on unlicensed basis, you don't know where it's used, and you can't get it back. So I mentioned about the study testing still going on with the utility companies. Well, they don't have I don't imply in any form or shape that any country, US is going to change it. Let me put it, take that example. US is going to change their decision. No, but one would have to make sure that these fixed systems are protected. And the one way to protect is either impose more constraints on the unlicensed or you do the transition. But you cannot, once you have authorized the spectrum to unlicensed, it's not coming back. Whereas if you are dealing with licensed services, and I'm probably talking to the people who know this more than even I do, is that once you license it for licensed services, you can coordinate. And if there is a real interference situation, you can coordinate and make sure that the party responsible, the offending party, is found out and the interference situation is taken care of. So that's another thing one has to consider before making any decisions about going in the upper 6 GHz for unlicensed. Next slide, please. Melissa, tell me when I have a couple more minutes, or maybe I'm already there. Okay.
No, you're not, Bina. You're not quite there. You have like about 10 more minutes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
You're
okay. Welcome. So what am I saying here? There are two key bands on the agenda item 1.2 for WRC 23. The first one, the C band, the 3.3 to 3.8 GHz. It has the lower 100 MHz and the upper 200 MHz, which is on the agenda. It is being authorized because some markets could not wait for the authorization. So 3.6 to 3.8 is already being authorized in some countries. However, that is one of the key decisions of the WRC for IMT identification. Why? And I don't mean to say that you would need all 500 megahertz or 400 megahertz or how much spectrum in your country will depend in this band on your needs, your market demands, your number of mobile network operators. But they are looking for 100 megahertz a minimum channel. So 3.6 to 3.8 is a key decision which we need to get out from WRC 23 for IMT identification for 5G launch. The other key decision is 3.3 to 3.4 gigahertz. There are incumbents, NATO countries use it for radio location, but many countries already have this band, but it's not available on the regional basis. So what we want is an IMT identification from WRC 23 in our region so that we can have the 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz as the largest bandwidth in the 5G devices. As I mentioned, it's already there from the 3GPP standard. What that does is it provides the regulators the flexibility to authorize what they see in their country within this range 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz. If they want 3.4 to 3.7, that's their call. But the equipment will support it. The tuning rate of the equipment would be 3.3 to 3.8. And that is the reason why it's extremely important that we get the positive outcome from WRC on these items. 6 gigahertz. I mentioned that some countries in our region have authorized unlicensed use of this band. And you hear about Wi-Fi 6E and about this band. However, there is interest in using this band, 6 gigahertz, the 700 megahertz bandwidth by IMT in some Latin American countries. They see this as expansion band for 5G, and they see that if they need to go out of the C-band for 5G, that is the only place to go, is the 60 gigahertz spectrum. If we don't have an IMT decision in 6 gigahertz, and you would hear that, well, you can use it for IMT anyway, because in this band, we have the advantage that 6 gigahertz, we have a mobile allocation co-primary for the entire band, which is true. You can put any application of IMT under mobile service. However, as I said, and I can't repeat enough, we need the harmonization for IMT, and that's why we go to WRC and ask for identification for IMT. So if we don't have 6 gigahertz spectrum for IMT, remember, we are not meeting the 2 gigahertz bandwidth requirement we talked right in the beginning. And in order to meet that, there would be pressure on the upper part of C-band for IMT for 5G expansion. There would be pressure. And if you want to retain some bandwidth for C-band in this range, 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz, for your fixed satellite services, for communication, for delivering services to your cruise ships, for your tourism industry, it is really critical that you look at the 6 gigahertz band as an expansion for licensed services, and consider all the, I don't want to say disadvantages, but impact of the decisions for going for unlicensed until you are absolutely sure about your marketplace and the spectrum needs, and both for the mobile broadband as well as the satellite services in the C-band. I also want to know, and you will note that, and you will hear more about it, that significant scale is already happening in Asia. Some countries are sometimes, depending on the market conditions, they cannot wait for the WRC decisions. WRCs only happen every 4 years. And then we have significant debates about these things. So they can't wait. So they are taking national decisions to go in 6 gigahertz and identifying it for IMT. As I mentioned, I read the press all the time. And just 2 days ago, the press was that United Arab Emirates is the first country to finish some significant trials to show the capacity in 6 gigahertz band and all the other 5G attributes in 6 gigahertz band, including the propagation and coverage and everything else. So they just did the trials, and they did the trials in partnership with their mobile network operators. And of course, this is all public information, and I'm sure you can find, if you search UAE trials on 6 gigahertz, you'll find it. And any information, Lucas and I talk about here, certainly we can, provide them if anyone requests. Okay, so my next slide, it should be last couple of slides. So next slide. So what is happening in CTEL? Melissa mentioned that we have a last meeting for our decision making for our region for WRC 23 is coming up in Ottawa, end of this month. And the discussion has been going on. This is the last meeting. So we have been discussing 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz as one of the key bands. We haven't concluded on it. Why we have not concluded on it? Because there are other interests, the satellite interests, FSS interests. And there are 5 proposals at this point in time. Some support 3.6, 3.7. Some support 3.7, 3.8. Or there is a draft Inter-American proposal which supports the 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz, but the final hasn't happened. You might say, why haven't I noted here 3.3 to 3.4 gigahertz? That was sorted out at the last meeting of CTEL in Mexico. And basically, folks recognized the importance of 3.3 to 3.4 gigahertz including the country they are using it for radio location, okay? So that has already become a proposal, an inter-American proposal. It has gone to the ITU for region 2 identification for that band. However, that is a proposal going from CTAL as a common proposal. We have to wait for the decision to come out of the ITU, and what I would suggest is, the more countries should be joining that IAP, and I'll close off on that in a minute. And 6 gigahertz band, I mentioned that some countries have identified for this band for unlicensed use, and there is a proposal for 7 countries to basically say no change. Let's just go to the conference and come back with no decision. I did not go into the details of 6 gigahertz item on 1.2. It's a little complex in the sense that for our region, this item only deals with 100 megahertz, the upper 100 megahertz, 7,025 to 7,125 megahertz for our region, region 2. The remaining 600 megahertz bandwidth in this band is primarily, okay, thank you, is only for, not primarily, only for region 1, which is the Europe, Middle East, Africa, and the Russian bloc. It is only for consideration and decision at this conference, as per the agenda, for those 4 subgroups of countries, region 1, they comprise region 1 of ITU. And so 7 countries in CTAL are supporting a proposal saying no change for all regions. And there is a common practice that we only stick to our knitting in a region. So this is a little different proposal from my perspective, and some of you might know my experience in WRCs. We usually do not go and talk about other regions. So it's little awkward proposal to say, while we can only, legitimately, we can only deal with 100 megahertz, that's the only one for agenda for our region, but we are giving a proposal for no change. Okay, yeah. So there is another proposal which says Canada, because it's only for our region 100 meg, it says support only 100 megahertz. So that preliminary proposal is sitting on the side about the 100 meg. And the last slide. So what's my ask to you? After saying this much, my ask to you is, I mentioned 3.3 to 3.4 gigahertz. We already have an inter-American proposal. 13 countries are supporting, even though they have, some of them have incumbents such as radio location, which will be protected. I request you to support this inter-American proposal for the ITU meeting so that we can come home and have this band identified for IMT for region 2. The next band request is, I mentioned there is a draft inter-American proposal for IMT in this band, and other proposals are varying between 3.6, 3.7, 3.7, 3.8. They're, I would say, all over the place. Our request obviously is to support this draft inter-American proposal. Remember, you have the full flexibility in your country to authorize the amount of spectrum you need. But the ITU WRC decision is going to give you an enabling provision through IMT identification. But you decide how much you need the spectrum. And last but not least, from GSMA perspective, there should be a balanced approach in 6 gigahertz. IMT in the upper 700 megahertz. And if you need, based on your needs for unlicensed spectrum, you can go lower 6 gigahertz for unlicensed spectrum, and Wi-Fi is one of the applications. Do not forget there is unlicensed spectrum, a big chunk of it in 5 gigahertz band. And you may want to see whether you have already authorized all that 5 gigahertz spectrum over 500 megs of bandwidth in the 5 gigahertz range in your country for unlicensed. I stopped there. Melissa, thank you very much. Maybe 30 seconds over time, but that's my first time that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Veena.
Thank you, and thanks for listening.
We will have questions and answers at the end of the complete session, but you can always start to put your questions in the chat from now, so that for Vina and for Lucas, we'll take them at the end of the session. Thank you both very much, Vina and Lucas, for the presentation. As a Caribbean national, I always love to hear when we talk about our connectivity agenda and also supporting our tourism industry, as Vina, you had mentioned, the cruise ship and the FSS. So we have a couple regulators on the call. So I am certain that they have heard your proposals and will be considering the technology part for their countries. Thank you very much, Vina and Lucas, GSMA. Ladies and gentlemen, our next presentation will be from Jose Ayala, who is the CALA Policy Director for Ericsson. Jose, over to you.
Thank you very much. I would like to share a presentation from Ericsson, sharing Ericsson's views on the mid-band spectrum and beyond. I hope you can see now my presentation.
Yes, we are, Jose. We are seeing.
Thank you. Well, basically, 5G is already present in all regions of the world today. There are 240 service providers that have launched commercial 5G services around the world, and there are a total of 1.1 billion subscriptions of 5G today. This technology has become the fastest growing technology in history. Just in the first quarter of 2023, 125 million subscribers were added. And in the next 5 years, 5G will account for all the mobile data traffic growth in this period from 2024 until 2028. By 2028, it is expected 5G will reach 4.6 billion subscriptions and will cover 85% of the world's population. This is quite impressive, and there are massive investments behind these numbers, investments that are made by the service providers, by vendors in developing new applications and better radios and terminals for this ecosystem. But also, it depends on the support of the administrations, like all the administrations in the Caribbean region. In the LAC region, we closed 2022 with about 7 million 5G subscriptions, but a substantial uptake is expected from 2024 and onwards, because there are many administrations in the region, around 14 in this year, 2023, that are conducting 5G spectrum auctions. So there will be a significant increase in the LAC region of subscriptions. By 2028, we expect that 5G will account for 42% of all subscriptions. So that is quite impressive. But to reach these possibilities of these estimations of the industry, and to benefit consumers and industry, we need a spectrum for 5G expansion. And the mid-bands are the sweet spots for delivering a better 5G user experience, especially in urban and suburban areas, where about 80% of the population live today in most cities in the LAC region. And here, as we saw from the GSMA presentation, the great presentation provided by Vina and Lucas, the GSMA estimates that the industry will require around 2 gigahertz of spectrum in mid-bands. And the reality is, if we add up all the spectrum that is available today, between 1 to 4 gigahertz, we, on average, the countries have identified around 1,150 megahertz in the mid-band for mobile technologies, and primarily 5G and 4G. That accounts for about 850 megahertz of deficit of spectrum in the mid-bands. And there are 3 particular bands that can provide this can help administrations meet these needs. The first one is the 6 gigahertz band, which is supported by a new band developed by the 3GPP, the N104. And it's already included in the discussions of Agenda Item 1.2 for Region 1, and the countries in Region 2 and elsewhere can add to this footnote. Then the second is opportunity is the spectrum in the range of 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz, which there is a large ecosystem developed by the 3GPP standard N77. And it's a range that has been already released in North America and the US and Canada, and offers an opportunity for expansion of 5G in the second half of this decade. And the last but not least is the band of 4.8 to 4.99 gigahertz, that there is an ecosystem in this band, the 3GPP N79, that can be used to provide commercial services already today. And this band is also part of the WRC-23 agenda under Agenda Item 1.1. So administrations should consider these 3 bands to meet the spectrum needs in mid-bands for the 5G expansion. Otherwise, there will be huge capacity problems, especially in the second half of this decade, and there will be degradation in user experience, as well as lack of investments, because it will be more expensive to build 5G in other bands. Another technology that we're watching closely in the industry is the 6G. The research of 6G is accelerating globally as different governments and research organizations are already discussing these standards, the use cases, and the spectrum needs. 6G is based on the desire to create a seamless merge reality between the physical and the digital world to enable and enhance communication among people and devices, especially IoT devices. This standard will be available by the end of 2030, and the ITU Working Party 5D already completed the draft framework that will be published very soon, that provides the common ground for the research among different organizations across the globe. 5G will introduce 6 usage scenarios compared to 3 in 5G that will support new types of communications, immersive communications with immersive reality, sensing connectivity, communications empowered by artificial intelligence, and with real-time availability. Also, this is to be driven by a new technology with ultra-fast communications with peak data rates beyond 100 gigabit per second, lower latency of 5 milliseconds or less, position accuracy of few centimeters, and significant energy improvements without the need to replace the battery, especially with the sensors, and greater reliability. But to make the 6G vision available, spectrum will be required, and especially spectrum in the wide area coverage type of applications. The industry has been studying different bands and different ranges. And from Ericsson, we believe, and also we share this vision with other partners in the industry, that 6G, will be possible if 3 types of spectrums are delivered. The first type is the primary spectrum range, is the wide area spectrum in the 6 to 15 gigahertz range. And this will provide support to 6G use cases indoors and outdoors with mobility. The organization GSA has estimated that on average, it will be required between 500 to 750 megahertz of additional spectrum per network, depending on the spectrum available in the mid-bands. And Here we present 6 types of bands in the range of 7 to 15 gigahertz that we have studied that are possible for the introduction of 6G. Then the second type will be bands in the sub-terahertz range above 92 gigahertz. And this type of spectrum will be useful for providing capacity in niche areas where there's a high density of devices. And then the last but not least is the existing spectrum that is going to be auctioned between 2023 and 2030 that will facilitate a gradual introduction of 6G. And this, we're looking at the 3 bands, 600 megahertz, 6 gigahertz that we mentioned before, and 42 gigahertz as well. The support we need from the Canto administrations or administrations in the Caribbean region is in 2 areas. The first one is to continue supporting the identification of the bands under agenda items 1.1, which is 4800 to 4990 megahertz, and agenda item 1.2, which is 3300 to 3400 megahertz, as well as 3600 and 3800 megahertz. There is a challenge in the first band, 4800 and 4990, because there's no support for IMT from enough countries. And also in the range of 3600 to 3800 megahertz, where are different views on different countries. And we need to close this gap and try to have an inter-American proposal in this range. As well, administrations are invited to consider joining a tentative identification for IMT of this upper part of the 6 gigahertz band in region 1 that will create a footnote, and other countries from other regions can join this identification via this footnote. And the last is to make the 6G possible by the end of this decade. We need the support from all the administrations in the LAC region, and particularly the Caribbean, to support studies to identify new bands within the range of 7 to 15 gigahertz as part of a new agenda item for IMT at WRC 27. That agenda item will help perform or conduct the coexistence studies that will determine if it's feasible to introduce IMT and provide protection to the incumbent services. And in that area, we don't need the 8 gigahertz totally. We need only 6 to consider 6 sub-bands that were listed in the previous slide. And administrations are invited to consider those bands. So I think I'm running out of time. I leave this to the end for questions. Thank you very much, Canto. We appreciate the invitation.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Jose Ayala from Ericsson. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, you can put your questions in the chat, and Jose and the other panelists will respond at the end when we have our question and answer sessions. Thank you very much for that, Jose. We will move on to our next presenters, who are from Nokia. So we will have now, ladies and gentlemen, Jose Arias, who is the LATAM North Policy Director, Nokia, and Celedonio von Wutanu, who is in charge of government affairs for Nokia. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm going to share the Nokia's view with regards to this topic.
Senior screen, Jose, you're good.
I believe it is right. Okay, thank you very much. So this is the position of Nokia about mid-band spectrum. And when we talk about mid-band, we face unlimited options. When we talk about new spectrum, not the spectrum that it is already assigned for operators. So at these days, no new spectrum is totally free for one service. So we are talking about coexistence and service operating in the same band at the same time. So we have limited options in this regards. So the next topic, we believe it is quite important. It is the traffic capacity that we are seeing in the networks nowadays, particularly in the metropolitan areas. So in this regard, mid-bands provide sufficient capacity to meet this traffic demand that we are seeing in urban environments. Mid-bands can have this kind of a mix between coverage and capacity. So we have seen, based on simulations provide for technical tools, that operators in this within these mid-bands can reuse their max grids. So this is an important topic, because with the same grid that they have for previous technologies or previous developments, they can still use this infrastructure. So this is important. So based on those topics, we believe that the government and us industry need to work together to address this demand. So what do we need to provide in our side as an industry? It's information to you to take the best decision based on the best information you can have at the moment of the decision. So the mid-band spectrum allocation should be with a view of a balance between the different services operating across the mid-band spectrum. So we have the 3.3 to 3.8 / 4.2 gigahertz, depends on the availability of the spectrum that regions can have or countries can have in their country. So this is the most important frequency band we have seen for 5G. Actually, there are some operations in 4G in this frequency band, but for 5G in mid-bands, we have seen this is the most important frequency band. It is in the 3GPP, identified as N78 or N77, and we have a strong supporting device ecosystem because of what I have said. And you can find solutions for indoor and outdoor coverage. So taking into account this physical propagation condition that you will find in 3.3 or 3.8 frequency band. So as well, in terms of 5G, you will find non-standalone and standalone solutions for implement networks. It depends upon what you will find in particular countries. So this is also a frequency band that is being adopted in CTEL and ITU environment. Many countries are joining the positions that are being worked in ITU or CTEL in different means, but it is a frequency band that is adopted in the region and around the world. So based on those inputs for you, Nokia supports the efforts to continue the harmonization and expanding the use for IMT in this frequency band. So then we have 4.4 to 5 gigahertz band. It is important to note that this frequency band can be used as a complementary band for development of IMT systems. So important also to note that this range, the whole range, has co-primary mobile allocations. So this is an important topic if we talk from the regulatory perspective about ITU and CTEL activities. So this is also a point that is going to be discussed in the WRC through Agenda Item 1.1. This actually has an IMT identification that was approved in WRC 19 for some countries, which are including in a footnote in the radio regulations. So important topic also that it is currently a 3GPP band identified as N79 as TDD. So Nokia supports, again, the efforts to further harmonize this frequency band for IMT. So taking into account that this can serve as a complementary band for 5G. And I said complementary because of what my colleagues just explained in the previous presentation, GSMA and also Ericsson. So going to the 6 GHz band, this is an 5G ideal frequency band to take into account, basically because of the advancements of antenna technology that you can find, particularly implemented in this frequency band. So it is a huge opportunity to use additional spectrum in this frequency range, which is underutilized. And this is important. It is not that we won't find services in that frequency band. It is that there are some opportunities in different countries across the region that could have this spectrum available. So we have to take advantage of that kind of situations and try to use this frequency band as a core frequency band for 5G as well. In terms also, considering also the frequency requirements that we saw. So this is a 3GPP band, release 17, and based on that contributions and that inputs, Nokia has the vision that we have to try this frequency band with a balanced approach between licensed and unlicensed use. This is a topic we have been discussing for many months and many years. So we support as Nokia the licensed use of the upper band. This is 64025 to 7126 as a licensed frequency band. So in order to meet the requirements already explained to you in the mid-band spectrum. So this is the vision that Nokia has in mid-bands. So thank you everyone to be here, and thanks for Canto to invite us to take presence in this meeting.
Thank you very much, Jose and Celedonia. Thank you, Nokia. Again, ladies and gentlemen, you are able to put your questions in the chat and we will respond to those at the end of the presentation. Thank you. The next and final presentation for this morning will be from Cesar Funes Garay, who is Public Affairs VP for LATAM for Huawei. Cesar, welcome. Looking forward to your presentation. You're on.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Thank you, Canto, for the organization of this webinar. I'm glad to share this information together with our partners from the IMT world. I want to talk about, and I will be sharing my screen now. I want to talk about what we see in terms of progress in several parts of the world, what's going on regarding this mid-band spectrum with a special focus on 6 gigahertz. After more than 4 years, actually, this has been a hot topic all over the world, similar to the C-band, which has been a hot topic for probably 20 years. So this is a topic that we should be looking at for long-term perspective. And therefore, we want to keep our commitment to the development of the mobile services on top of this spectrum as well, as we have been doing as well for the C-band at the moment. So first, I want to share with everyone what we know it's going on in the different regions. As mentioned by Bina, the topic is clearly under studies in Region 1, and we have received feedback from countries, some specific countries that are strongly supporting the upper 6 gigahertz spectrum portion to be identified for IMT, allocated for mobile services. In the Russian area, we have countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Russia. In Africa, it looks like there could be a preliminary support of the identification of the whole 700 megahertz. I think, if I'm not mistaken, just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, Europe made the draft definition of what they are going to be presenting at the WRC, and there are certain conditions that should be met in order to do the identification. Different points that the most important one is probably the one protecting the existing services, and based on coexistence and coordination techniques, we are fully convinced that this is going to happen. From the Middle East, we see a good number of countries also promoting this, and I just heard the news from Vina that the UAE recently finished some testings. In the Asia Pacific area, there are countries that are strongly supporting the upper 100 megahertz for IMT, which is a similar, well, it could be a similar situation in the region too, because it's part of the agenda item. But we also see a good number of countries that are strongly supporting the upper portion of 6 gigahertz for IMT. And we know that in CTEL, it's been discussed, it's been said and mentioned about the no change situation. It is important to remind that as part of the agenda item 1.2, at least 100 megahertz are there for discussion. So this is something we must keep in mind regarding the process. We have also been following up what's going on regarding the ecosystem development. And there are a good number of documents that have been developed by different organizations, including the GSMA, with a report that already includes a good view of what's going on with the standardization, the devices, and quite relevant for us to mention that we have found at least 8 countries that were doing testings, including several countries in Europe, the southeast part of Asia, and quite relevant to our Latin American and Caribbean region in Brazil. It is public that they started testings, the regulator and the operator, or one of the operators in a major city, and the testings continues. I also want to touch on some probable too technical information, but we have been supporting some of these tests and taking advantage of the new technologies available. The conclusion of these tests is that the coverage with 6 gigahertz compared to 3.5 gigahertz is pretty similar. And there is a good important advantage, which is the capacity. Using the same amount of sites, the same location, we have found the same coverage, but a stronger capacity. This is also a report of what happened about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, a testing also in Germany, where the performance is quite good. Again, comparing the 6 gigahertz and the 3.6 gigahertz in this case, from our perspective, those are the key bands for the development of the 5th generation and the next evolution when we talk about coverage and capacity and the development of new and a lot several use cases which require, quite importantly, strong capacity, quality of services, and mobility. That's very important. The traffic continues to grow, and the only way to support all the demands that are expected to come in the next few years from the users is to have enough spectrum in the mid-bands. I also want to share what's going on in the testing what we know in the testing in Brazil. It's not just a small area, it's not just a small town, it is actually happening in Rio de Janeiro. Going soon with a second carrier to the city of Brasilia. Different scenarios, outdoor to outdoor, outdoor to indoor. We have even seen a good demonstration of penetration even in the areas of windows and walls. The capacity is still strong, both downlink and uplink, which is what we see is a relevant topic. Finally, in line with what all the previous presenters have been talking about, this 6 GHz spectrum is not just a decision that can be made in the next few months or years, or will impact only the next few months or years. It's definitely going to impact the development of the mobile industry for decades. So there is a strategic value of the band, and any decision should be taken carefully. It is a strong economic value that has been studied and presented by different organizations. Different consultants, including GSMA, have presented already some studies that identify, and I think that Vina mentioned that, the best economic value outcome is by using the whole band for IMT. However, we understand there could be a balance, or there should be a balance. If there is a need of additional spectrum for Wi-Fi, there could be additional 500 megahertz. But if you do the balance approach, the economic value, including the 700 megahertz for IMT, is one of the most important economic values. It is a good practice to plan the spectrum for long term. So already mentioned that 5G and 5G Advanced moving towards 6G, we still need the mid-bands. That means, yes, we will need additional future spectrum for the next generation, but today the most important piece of a spectrum that we think must be addressed is 6 gigahertz. On top, in addition to, and as a complement to 3.5, as every presenter has said. It is a global effort. It is not just a regional situation. I think in this case, harmonization for the global industry is important. And as everyone knows, I would say the final initial decision, I'm sorry for the wording, but the final initial decision is going to happen just about 3 months from now. So there is no need to rush any decision that could be impacted by the WRC outcomes. And as everybody mentioned, the ecosystem is being developed as traditionally the mobile industry commitment. Once we make the plans, we will deliver both the infrastructure and the devices. So with this, I thank you again for the invitation and your attention, and I will be happy to answer any question that can be asked.
Thank you, Cesar. Thank you for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of our series of presentations from GSMA, from Ericsson, from Nokia, and from Huawei. Now it is over to you for any questions you may have. You can put your questions in the chat. I haven't seen any questions as yet. Or you may wish to open your mics to ask a question. I will just pause for a couple of seconds so that you can send your questions or open your mic. Once you raise your hand, then I will acknowledge you and you'll be able to ask your questions. Other than that, I do have some questions for the panelists, but let me just give another 10 seconds for anybody who might wish to raise their hand or to put a question in the chat. All righty, let me get to my questions. So my question to the panelists, and anybody can respond, just to remind you, panelists and attendees, that we close our session at 11:30. So we have just about 15 minutes for Q&A. So my question to the panelists is about the trade-off and the long game. So we have been talking quite a bit about 6G and the fact that, you know, we need to take a balanced approach and we don't have to rush a decision. I also recall, I believe it was the Ericsson presentation that says that we're likely to run out of capacity closer to the end of this decade, closer to 2030, if I understand it correctly. So the question to the panel is, how do we keep up with the changes along the way as an industry and as a region? Because if a decision is not made on 6G now, will it be made in WRC 27? How do we keep up? Because things could change. So any panelist can answer that. How does the Caribbean keep up with this matter as it evolves? And what should we do to keep up? So again, the question is, how do we keep up with the changes as things evolve with 6G spectrum?
So Melissa, probably if I may react to your question, I think a big hype was created, you know, like, hey, if we don't make a decision now, we are missing something, you know, FOMO as the word in English, you know. And I think during this presentation, it was presented that is not the case, that each country has its own reality, you know. For those that are interested in our reports on the different scenarios and with how to unlock the benefits, you will see that, I mean, in most of our countries, Latin America and the Caribbean, still, you know, the penetration of the fiber is a big issue, you know. So if you don't have that, having additional spectrum for Wi-Fi is like adds no much value. So I think my main reaction to your question is, hey, we are not missing anything if we don't make a decision. It's not that we are lagging behind something. I think wise decision needs to be made. I think Bina made a great point in saying, hey, be careful, because with unlicensed spectrum, you cannot roll back. If you make a mistake to put it in a way, then it's not that you can change the allocation and you know, and have a different service there. With unlicensed, you don't know where you have your stations, you cannot control them. And once it's been, you know, you have the devices all over the place, then you cannot recover the band. So that's why you have to think very careful about the decisions. And one final, you know, word maybe is that we love Wi-Fi. You know, actually, as GSMA, you know, most of our members, they offer services over Wi-Fi. So I could say that we have both visions. It's not satellite versus IMT, you know, or something like that. It's we both, I think Huawei, Ericsson, Nokia is the same for them. You know, they manufacture equipment with both technologies. So somehow we really love Wi-Fi. And now actually our proposal actually almost doubles the amount of spectrum. You know, if you take into account 2.4, 5.8, I think there should be around 600 megahertz of spectrum available. And with our hybrid proposal, we are doubling the spectrum, you know, for the Wi-Fi service. We think Wi-Fi is a great service. We love Wi-Fi, and our members, they also have Wi-Fi in their portfolio. So it's not that we want to kill Wi-Fi, as I heard in some other presentations. We really like it, and actually our proposal doubles and try to balance, you know, as Bina said, hey, if we miss the 6 GHz window, then where are we going? We'll put more pressure on 3.5 GHz range. So that would be my reaction to your question, Malaysia.
Thank you for that, Lucas. I do have another follow-up question. I'm not seeing any question in the chat, nor have I seen anybody raise their hand. So that allows me to ask another question to the panelists. If anybody else wishes to respond or react to the question I asked previously, please feel free to do so. I do have a follow-up question on the technology roadmap. So I really appreciated how it's important for each country, for the Caribbean region, to understand where it is at on its technology roadmap. Important for us is the whole matter of connectivity at all levels. How would you say Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei, GSMA, how would you recommend, or what are your views or comments on just developing that technology roadmap and how it fits in with the spectrum that we're looking for? And also to just, as you all know, when we go to a RRC, it's a long game. It's a 7 to 10 years. How do you actually project? How does the region project what it should support when we're looking at technology quite a bit into the future?
I would like to take a first
Thank you,
comment,
Cesar.
Malaysia. I think it's important to recognize the benefits that the whole region has from being able to use the technology from every part of the world. And the more available options, the best for the value of the services and the cost and the benefits to the society. We are committed to delivering the best technology for all the markets in every market that we operate. In this case, I want to stress what I mentioned. This is a decision that is going to impact long-term. So accelerating the decision, as Lucas said, just the hype of receiving certain pressure because there is a promise of potentially immediate services to be resolved. It was really just a hype. I mean, some countries that made a decision in 2021, just probably a year and a half after the WRC 19, some of them reversed their decision. Others actually are thinking about it, but most of them have not received any benefit for making the spectrum available for unlicensed. So we think that the way the IMT industry works is with this long-term view, with a strong commitment to the development of the ecosystem and making sure that the benefits of the technology are going to be available for more and more people, improving connectivity, promoting the demand, the adoption, and making the services more feasible for everyone.
Thank you, Cesar. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Any further comments on this particular?
Yes, I would like to add a comment on this. Is the 6 gigahertz band is so important for the mobile industry, and we're just days away from having a final result from the WRC 23, exactly 111 days from now, when we will know the outcome. And if we look back, the countries that took an early decision in the LAC region were in 2020, and Wi-Fi is still non-existent in those countries. Having Wi-Fi in a university campus is not really a massive adoption, I would say. And we're just a few days from a final result that will empower the industry and the governments to take a better utilization of the spectrum. So our advice is to wait until the WRC 23 results. Then if for some reason the decision is not to support it here, administrations must think, what is the alternative? Because we need 2 gigahertz of the spectrum in mid-bands. And we saw that there is a gap of around 850 megahertz. So what band will compensate that for 5G alone? 6G will require more spectrum, and that will be by 2030. So we need to have an agenda item in WRC 27. So the challenge is there's no other alternative for 5G. If we don't get enough capacity, we will have more expensive deployments, slower time to market because we need to approve new sites, and then the consumers will face a lower expectation user experience. So we need to think about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. Thank you, Bina. Recognizing you, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make it very clear that the 6 gigahertz band we're talking for 5G expansion is for WRC 23 decision. The WRC's decisions are, we keep, you have heard many times now that we are talking long term. WRC decisions are for long term. Because the WRCs take place every 4 years, if we miss an opportunity at a given WRC, we don't have that opportunity. The best case scenario really is you go and push the item to the next WRC, but we don't do that. WRC's ITU doesn't like that. So the best case scenario is that you could address that item 8 years down the road. And you don't want to miss those opportunities, because being a UN organization, there are not many things in our hand. So that's one part. The other part about this long-term decisions is that these are enabling provisions. WRC provides you the flexibility, and you decide how much spectrum you want to give to IMT, when you want to release it, when you think you have sufficient demand, who are your incumbents, and what priority you want to give. Those are all national sovereign decisions. But if you don't have this enabling provision from the WRC, and because of IMT, and we are looking for harmonization, that doesn't happen. And why do we need the harmonization? And it's becoming more important for the connectivity agenda, because we want to reduce this digital gap, and we want the most advanced services to, let's not create the digital technology gap that, the services are not at the same generation level or same technology level when we are providing the connectivity. And that's why we need this IMT identification, because many, many developing countries in their national regulations refer to, if the band is identified for IMT, their national decisions are based on that. Their national standard adoption is based on that. They don't participate in 3GPP, but they do participate in ITU, being an intergovernmental organization. So it's the flexibility, the enabling provisions, and long term. And that's why we go to the WRC. It is not that you have to come home and immediately authorize 6 gigahertz band or 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz and tell the satellite guys, move out. No, that is your call. And as long as you can deal with your neighbors, you are fine. But you need that international enabling provision. Thank you.
Thank you, Bina. Ladies and gentlemen, Celidonia, please go ahead, acknowledging your hand.
No, if I want to do 2 comments, if it's possible. First of all, regarding your first question, in my case, it was not clear if you were asking about 6G or 6 gigahertz. And 6G is a technology, and 6 gigahertz is a frequency.
Indeed.
And as a frequency, of course, the idea is to be used by 5G, and in the future, also to be used by 6G.
Yes.
Regarding the second question on the technology, I could say the technology is in constant evolution. If we see all the evolution of the mobile technology from 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G, the focus is in this triangle. So you want to have more capacity, more reliability, less latency, and a massification. So a lot of units working at the same time in a specific area. And the evolution works on all these topics: increasing capacity, increasing reliability, reducing latency. And that is a reality. But if you want to have access to this new technology, you need new spectrum, because you cannot use the current available spectrum, because that spectrum is being used by all technologies, by 3G, by 2G, by 4G. So that is the reason we started to work in the past in order to identify dedicated spectrum for 5G, in order to allow the deployment of this new technology. And the capacity or the new capacity of the technology requires a lot of continuous spectrum in the hands of one owner. And that is the reason because we focus on 3.5, and now we are focusing on 6 gigahertz. And for 6G, the requirement is also to have more continuous spectrum. And in order to have this, I have to look to a new spectrum, not be used by mobile operators or by anybody in the mobile industry, in order to try to have all this kind of spectrum for the new technology. And I can bet that when we start to discuss about 7G, we are gonna work also try to identify new spectrum for that technology in order to make that technology work.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so very much, Caledonia. I want to express Cantor's thanks to all the panelists from GSMA, from Nokia, from Ericsson, and from Huawei. Thank you, Vina. Thank you, gentlemen, for this very interesting and stimulating discussion for the Caribbean region. We appreciate it. We look forward to GSMA and the companies focusing some more on this region and just, you know, looking at indicators that are very specific to our region, because typically we get lumped in with Latin America and our markets tend to be, you know, much smaller. And even though the needs can be similar. So we look forward to some more discussion as time goes on how we will evolve the spectrum that is required for mobile and the rest of our ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much. Let me just see, there's something in the chat if there's a question. Okay, no. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you so very much for attending. We have currently 56 participants. So we think that that is a good, robust number. Thank you again to Vina, to Lucas, to Cesar, to Jose Ayala, as well as Jose Arias, to Caledonia. Thank you very much, Vina, gentlemen, attendees. Appreciated your time and the presentations, and I'm certain we'll be in touch in some forum. Thank you so very much. Have yourself a great day.
Thank you, Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Canto.
Thank you, bye.